Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the Nifty 3.5 webinar. Today we're going to talk about at least a handful of the changes that came into the Nifty 3.5 update. There's a whole lot of them, so it's hard to cover every last one, but I'm going to touch on some of the major ones that I think will have a huge impact in your workflow. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. I'd be happy to go through those, especially if they're kind of relevant to what we're talking about today. Just some housekeeping notes. This is my first webinar in a little bit. So if there's some rust that I'm knocking off, I apologize. And I appreciate you hanging in there with me. And if you are watching this in the future on YouTube, welcome. But of course, big welcome to everyone here who made it to the call. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is Nifty's interface. So this is maybe one of the hardest things to qualify because it's kind of evolved over time. But one of the major things 3.5 emphasized was cleaning up the interface without taking away functionality, but just making it a lot easier to approach. So those include a lot of small things like the ability to reorganize or rearrange the order in which our projects are shown within a portfolio. If we go into a project, we'll see that there are a lot fewer buttons across the top, smaller squares here. Some of our edit, we have like a scalable solution for the different edits on our different boards and the different parameters we can pull up through this gear section rather than making those each their own menu on every board. So if you ever kind of sit back and go, hey, Nifty's kind of clean to look at, that's something that happened over time. It's one of the 3.5 emphasis, but it's not something that just came all in one update. It kind of trickled in over time. So one of the things I want to start with is lists. Lists are, in my opinion, probably the biggest feature to come into Nifty 3.5. So if you got a chance to check out my list video, bear with me because there's going to be a lot of the similarity, though we're going to go a little bit further than that video took it. But I get a lot of questions on, we've been using statuses all these years. So what are lists? Or I've been using milestones. Well, what are lists? So I'm going to create a new project and we're going to go through this together. So I'm going to do website creation. Now, I understand that all of you might not be creating websites, but this is just a good way for me to explain how to use lists. And I'm going to start with list view as my default. Okay, so fundamentally, what lists do are group our tasks together based on a commonality. What I don't mean is where they are in their life cycle. Are they to do? Are they in progress? That's what statuses are for. Lists are great for something that it can change, it might not. So for example, if you have a phase of a project or a type of task. So in the case of website creation, I'm going to have like my first phase, which is kickoff. So these are my kickoff tasks, right? And I'm going to create a new list called design. And I'm going to create another one called development. So now what I'm able to do is put these into buckets, different groups for my tasks. If you are using milestones, this is the same feature. However, lists do not have to be on your roadmap. Milestones do. So what we ran into was that teams who weren't using their roadmap, weren't really leveraging milestones, didn't get the benefit of grouping tasks in this way. So they're trying to make everything conform to the idea of a status. So you had this kind of hybrid status of like, this is this type of task and this person's job to do it. Well, now we're allowed to have both of those parameters. So before I start creating tasks, what I want to do is flip over to our Kanban view. So what we'll notice here is when I'm in list view, our group by is defaulting to list. So these are the groups of tasks, right? We can always change this grouping. So if I want to do assignees, due dates, status, I can alter this, but this is the default for our list view. Versus Kanban, the default is status. So Kanban, a lot of times you think of agile, you think of kind of rapid, you get this left to right movement. Even if it's a CRM, you get this idea of thinking something starts here and it journeys all the way to completion. Now your team might be what I call binary, to do and completed, and that's fine. If that works for you, all the better. However, you might want to add some other different indicators. So you might want to have a status for in progress. You might have in review. And now these are kind of agnostic terms. If you're a development team, review might be QA. If you're a content team, it might be editing. But this is just a way so we understand where the life cycle of this task is rather than just to do and done. And again, if you just use to do and done, that works and no need to change it. So I'm going to give these some colors, just make it a little bit more fun. To do, in progress, and in review. Okay. So now when I go back to my list view, we will see that when I create a task, kickoff meeting, it's in the status to do, and it's in the list kickoff. And let's not forget, we can always rearrange these columns. So maybe I'm like, I don't necessarily want to have all of these here. I can turn them off or change the order of tasks. You might find it's redundant to have list right here when I have my list, but this is actually really great for workflows where I need to move this to another list. So that's why this is offered as a column. If in this case, for example, I'm probably not going to be moving tasks to different lists, I might disable this. Also worth noting is, let me get some more tasks in here. We have kickoff meeting, we have information architecture, and we have finalize copy, website copy. If I need to change these in bulk, whether it's status or list, for example, if you don't currently have lists and you have a bunch of tasks that you think should maybe be a list with this new idea, you can select them all, turn them into a list, and then create some statuses, bulk select them in list view and move them to different statuses. We do have bulk select in Kanban. You can't just do the shift like a Excel or something like that. So that's why I like doing it in list view, but we do have it in Kanban as well. Okay, so I'm going to just jot down a few more tasks here. We have homepage, UX, about UX, contact UX, homepage UI, about UI, and contact UI. So this is kind of the design phase. I need to fix the typo, otherwise it's going to drive me mad. And then we have development. I'm going to keep this really high level. I'm going to say develop, test, and launch. Okay. So I've kind of just jotted down a bunch of different tasks, and we can see these are all in to do, right? And they're in our respective lists. So we might start moving these, like this one's in progress, this one's in review, this one is in progress as well. And if just to add context there, if we go to Kanban, it's the same as dragging these over into our different columns. So now I'm getting an intersection of where does this task belong and in which status is it currently? This is something that, again, if you've been using these milestones, you've probably benefited from already, but if you haven't been, this is something that might be really helpful. And in fact, this is exactly what Swimlane does, is this intersection, right? Here's the kickoff milestone, or in this case, it's a list because it's not a milestone, and the relative status of all of these tasks. So you can see now we're really getting this grid of our lists or milestones and our statuses. Now, similar to our other views, we can rearrange Swimlane. So if I want to break this out by assignees, we don't have assignees right now, so I'll revisit that in a moment. But the idea that which currently we previously, before 3.5, we could not rearrange or group these Swimlane views. So Swimlane got a lot of updates as well, because we expect a lot more usage out of it with lists. So I'm going to dole out some assignments really quickly here so we can get some more vibrance. So I'll give these to me. Actually, you know what? I'm going to give these to someone else. Give these to Carlos. And we'll say UX is for Emily. All right. So I've doled out a bunch of tasks here at warp speed. So now if I do any of these filters, let's go back to Swimlane. And if I want to group this by assignee, I can see in which which list and which assignee is everything distributed. So we can see we have this group by is giving us the ability to reimagine the different layouts of the fundamental data of our task board. Okay. So here's where the next major change in 3.5 came in, is how we're handling milestones. Milestones have been re-understood in Nifty to be a list that's been shared to our roadmap. So just for kind of argument's sake, I'm going to give these a couple deadlines and we'll see what happens. I'm going to say show in roadmap as milestone. That's through our options dot, right? Now we see that little milestone object pop up here, and we go to our roadmap, and lo and behold, our tasks are within our roadmap in a milestone. And I can also remove this, by the way. So like if you finished a phase and you just want this off your board, but you want to keep the record of those tasks in your list, now you just remove the milestone from our roadmap. But we've created this inherent tie between milestones and lists. So it's a lot easier to get them onto your roadmap rather than I've created all these tasks. Now I need to create a milestone and I need to tie my task to the milestone. Well, you're kind of building milestones as you're building a list. Just whether or not you want to create a milestone out of it for a roadmap is up to you. Some workflows really just don't call for it. Others kind of are built around the roadmap and then kind of trickle backwards into a task board. So there's value from both directions. So I'm going to give some tasks down here, some due dates, so we can get this on our task board as well. So we can discuss one of the next objects I really want to mention in the 3.5 update. Okay, so let me make sure I share this to our roadmap as well. And now we have our design. Now, as I've always mentioned, your milestones do not need to stagger like this. If you have a phase-based workflow, they might, but you can easily have milestones that have overlapping due dates. That's not a problem. One thing I do want to talk about, and this isn't new in 3.5, but it does have an impact from something that is new in 3.5 is auto mode. So if you're not used to using our roadmap, or even if you feel like you're a roadmap master in Nifty, I think auto mode is a really clever tool to make sure you know you have in your tool belt, even if you decide that you don't need it. So if you've had an experience in the past where you build a milestone, but every time you go to try to change your task deadline, like if I need to change this to be the next day, I get this pop up and Nifty says, you have to adjust your milestone, do this. And it feels like I'm managing two things at once. Well, that's a good indicator that you should be using auto mode. What auto mode does is invert the, kind of flip the hierarchy of information between milestones and tasks. What do I mean by that? So in this case, with auto mode off, we are saying tasks must conform to the due date of our milestones. In fact, I can create a milestone and give it due dates right now, and then add tasks into it. I can even choose from a pre-existing list like development, right? Because that one's not yet shared to the roadmap. Auto mode says my milestone is simply going to reflect the array of dates that my tasks have. So I don't need to manage my milestone due dates. Those will be managed by my managing of task dates. So if I need to extend a task beyond my milestone due date, I don't need a pop-up to do it. I'm just going to do it and the roadmap will follow. So you'll see what I mean here. When I turn on auto mode, you see some of these kind of change their shape. And because what it's doing is like kind of vacuum packing. Oh, it's vacuum packing itself to be inside our milestone. But now I can drag this out and the milestone date range reacts accordingly. So auto mode is really great for, I just want to manage my tasks and have my roadmap follow. So if you don't use the roadmap currently and you're kind of roadmap curious, this is a great way to get started. You turn on auto mode because you can just change those task deadlines and your milestones will react accordingly. This, like I said, is impacted by one of the other changes we did make in 3.5, which is cascading dependencies. So when in manual mode, if I change the dates of my milestone, tasks within my milestone will not change their dates by default, because it's up to me to adjust the deadlines for those tasks. It's auto mode, but more. All right, so let me revisit that idea. So what we've added is called cascading dependencies. So in this case, if I want to set a task dependency, my kickoff is dependent on information architecture. So within my milestone, I can't start the second task until I finish the first. I've set that dependency, and now I'm going to set a dependency on finalized copy on kickoff meeting, which is now we have a dependency set here and set here. When I extend the deadline, if I change the deadline of this task, this first one, we will see it's going to adjust the deadline of the other tasks that are dependent on it accordingly. So now we're cascading those deadlines. Similarly, if I take this one and move it back, the start date adjusts, all of these adjust with it. It's just based on the due and start dates. I'm sorry, it's actually just based on the due dates. So if I move this start date forward, nothing's going to change. So it's really just based on the changing of those due dates. And it works in the middle of the stream, right? So what I mean by that is I just moved my kickoff meeting. This task will move, but this one does not. So now we're seeing how those dependencies are allowing us to help us manage future deadlines by just adjusting the first one or mid-chain dependency. So I'm just going to remove these for a second so I can reorganize my board without everything shifting around on me. So one of the things auto mode does is allow us to cascade the tasks in the next milestone if we set a milestone dependency. So let me just add a little bit of, I like doing this kind of staggered because I think things become a little bit easier to see. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is say, this milestone is dependent on this milestone. So I'm going to set a dependency from design on kickoff. Now watch what happens. When I shift this first task, sorry, I think I shifted the wrong one. You want to shift. Oh, I didn't set my dependencies. That's why. One moment. So this one we have on kickoff call, kickoff meeting, and kickoff meeting we set on information architecture. Okay, let's try that again. So now when I shift this first task, everything is going to shift within it, right? So it's really a great way of managing our downstream date changes as well with those dependencies. It's going to react into the next milestone. So that milestone dependency we can think of as in auto mode, keep cascading into that next dependency or into that next milestone. So it pushes all of our task dates into the future. If this feels like it's a bit overwhelming for you right now, I would not worry about dependencies. I would just focus on auto mode, managing your task deadlines, and then things will start to take place on their own in the roadmap. Then you might get a little bit more persnickety around shifting task deadlines down the stream based on these dependencies. So again, really what we're focusing on today is these 3.5 updates, which are made to make life a lot easier. We can start every project more or less the same way, which is building our lists and deciding then if we want to move this into a dependency flow or into a milestone rather. I've got a couple questions here, so I'm just going to go through these really quickly, see if they're relevant to where we're at right now. Is there a way to set more than one dependency for a task? There is, sort of. So we can have a task and a milestone dependency. So for example, homepage UX can have a dependency based on the milestone. So the design milestone is dependent on the kickoff milestone. And then I can also say homepage UX, this is maybe a bad example. Let me say about UX. About UX is also dependent on homepage UX. So now I'm saying this cannot be started until all of these are done and this is done. So the dependency levels are set. We can set one on the milestone level and one on the task level. How do I set priorities for tasks without putting a due date on them? So if you're not using our roadmap, which is kind of due date sensitive to say the least, you can manage priorities. We give you these priorities right out of the box with our tags. So I might say these are high, this one's medium, this one's low. And you can now use this, whether it's within the project to sort, we can filter, we can group. So I want to group by high priority, medium, and low priority. The other one was filter. So I just want to see my high priority tasks. So that's how you can manage priorities without relying on due dates. I'm a big fan of due dates. I know some people aren't too big on due dates. Here's where I'm at with due dates. As far as I'm aware, we're all kind of creatures with a finite time scale on this planet. So there is some due date on this task, right? So maybe shoot for the latest date that you could feasibly have it done by. And at least you have some date on the calendar and something to give you an automated reminder. That's just my take. If you don't agree with it, that's totally up to you. Okay, so one of them is how do we have lists, statuses, and how to keep up when to use each? Hopefully I've answered that question. And similarly to statuses, if you feel like, hey, everything really just feels like it's one list to me, that's okay. That's not a problem. Again, these tools are here to make your life simpler. There is such a thing, in my opinion, as over-organization. So if you feel like you're doing one of these things or the other just to do it, you might not need to, but should the need ever arise, well, that's what these bulk selects are for. So it's never in stone. We can always go ahead and make changes. So if we need to create a new list down the line, that's feasible. One more thing to note. You'll see when I moved this design milestone or this list onto my roadmap, thus making it a milestone, a new list appeared called untitled list. Nifty is always going to make sure you have a list in your project that is not a milestone. That way we have tasks that aren't going to be dedicated to the roadmap. So if you see this appearing, that's why that's happening. It's because all of the other roadmap or all of your other lists are on your roadmap. Also worth noting is that once we have roadmap milestones, that the lists will float to the bottom on our Swimlane view. So that's just something else to keep in mind as well when you're going through your project and moving lists onto the roadmap. All right, so let me just clean up some of these questions here and make sure I'm yes, all of this is being recorded. Just want to make sure that's on the record. Okay, we've answered that. So I'm not going to go into budget tracking today just because that's not really in the scope of 3.5, but I appreciate the question. And we've talked about due dates. Okay, so one other feature that's new in Nifty, or I should say been revitalized in our 3.5 update, are recurring tasks. We've added a lot more flexibility and control around recurring tasks. So I'm going to go to my task dates and I'm going to say recurring. We give you a bunch out of the box. So first day of the month, last day of the month, first Monday. There's a lot of options that are pretty popular that you can just choose. But I'm going to show you the rationality behind these, how these are constructed. So if we go date, custom, that's where we have our ability to kind of create all this ourselves. So let's say, for example, and I know we give this one out of the box, but let's just say the first day of every month. And then we'll do the last day of every month. Here we have first day of every month starting on January. So the starting on is really relevant for periodic. So for example, every 3 months, so once a quarter, I want a task created on the first day of every quarter. So now starting on January, because that's when Q1 starts, I want you to create, or I want this task to be started. So that's where we have date 1. Now, if I put date 0, that defaults to the last day. You can see this really handy tool just updates to tell us when this is going to occur. So date 0 is going to tell us when it's the last day of the month. Or if I do -1, that's the second to last day of every month. Whereas 1 is the first day of every month. We also added these advanced options. So if I want to add an independent start and due date to this task as well, that's one of the big major points of feedback we got with our recurring tasks is I want to be able to recur a task on this day, start it on the next, complete it X amount of days from there. So that's where we can choose not only start and due dates, but what else in this task should recur versus should appear blank. So offset days. This is similar to, if you've ever gotten a chance to check out how we're managing templates, was offset days. These are telling us how many days from the date should this offset or should this take action. So when I say 0, this is going to be 0 offset days on my start date. So that means the day that this task is recurring, or the recurring date of this task, is also the start date of this task. If I put 1, that means this task should start the day after the second day of every quarter, so to speak. But if I say 0, that's the day it's recurring. And then 4 means I want it to be due 4 days later. So now I can have a task recur every first day of every quarter, and it's due 4 days after that. And then we can see those appear here. So let's say, I want to say month, every 3 months on the first day. And we can see here, like it's giving us the readout as to when these are going to occur. And these are the first day of the quarters, right? And that's where that starting on comes into play. If you're using some sort of regiment around fiscal year, or you want it to be, you want to make sure it's orienting. Because if I didn't set this, if there was no starting on date, then this would be, it's hard to set quarterly because I would have to time the day correctly, right? Well, now I can kind of throw that date where this is kind of backdating the recurrence, so to speak. So now we have every 3 months, and we have the new one appear for the next. And here's our due date range, right? So it's recurring. We have 0 on the offset date. So here it is. The start date is on the 1st because it's 0 days from when it was recurring on, to the 5th because we added 4 days on top of that. So the new recurring, there's a lot of different parameters. If you find one that you're trying to create that's not covered in our scope, let us know, because we've really tried to come up with something that could get every date we can think of. It's really surprisingly tricky, but it's something that we feel like we've got. So again, if you have a certain date that you feel like is in a blind spot or a recurrent parameter, please let us know. We'll see if we can accommodate that. All right, so I have some other questions coming up. These aren't really around 3.5. So I'll be happy to try to cover these a little bit later. I do want to wrap up a couple more items of 3.5. One of which is the ability to have a lot more control over the groupings on our cross-project tools. So as we saw on our project level, we offer a lot more group bys, as well as filters like user tag filters, and also multiple filters. So I can say, like, I want tags that are high priority, and I don't have any other tags right now, but if I create one, let's say, oh, we do, okay, 10% and 10%. So now you can see I'm adding multiple filters, tags into this filter. Also, this multi-select tool for our projects also found its way into overview. So now, rather than just be a drop down for the different portfolios, you can go across your portfolios if you want segmented reporting. Here we go. We have 2 different website projects and 2 different portfolios. Previously, this was just all portfolios or choose your portfolio. So now we have some more options around that. Are there any other questions before I jump into anything, kind of start going off the rails here, because I know this is a general Q&A. Are there any questions around the 3.5 updates that I haven't covered that anyone has? We said recurring date to show, let's do X days. Okay, so one of the questions we have around here is the visibility of recurring dates. So to go back to that example, can we have this task only appear on that recurring date? In Nifty, there's no way to turn this off. Currently, tasks are just going to appear right away, and they're going to give you that recurring date out in advance. So the task is created. That said, this tucks itself away. So if you're using all tasks, if you're using my tasks, this is going to be filed away for October. So the upshot is that it's still in your calendar. You can account for these different tasks. You're just not going to be asked to prioritize it until you get there, whether it's all tasks, my work, or any other kind of date level grouping on the project level. So just want to clear up that. That's one of the things we get asked a lot about recurring tasks. So this is working as intended when this task appears right away, even though it's the recurring date is out in October. That's what we intended. Okay, so it seems like the remainder of these are going to be questions that aren't necessarily around 3.5, which is perfectly fine. I just want to make it clear that we're drawing a line in the sand here. If you do have questions around 3.5, let me know. I'm going to see if I can answer some of these other questions. We have one around templates. Creating templates is the only way to create a template to make a project, put all the stuff in it, then click save as a template. I would say, in short, yes. There's maybe some discrepancy there. So, for example, when I go to create a template, here, let me just change these dates out into the future. Just trying to make sure this is organizing correctly. So when I save a template, it's going to auto-populate with the information within the project. So the best way to do it is to go ahead, once you've created the project for the first time, is save it as a template, and it's going to give you the parameters as they're already inserted into your tasks. If you've not set any task parameters, when I said for the most part, like sort of, this is the kind of caveat. If you didn't put in start dates and due dates for your tasks, you can do so here. This is going to pick up those dates. So if you're more comfortable setting in offset days here rather than having these numbers auto-generate based on the task deadlines, that's up to you. One thing that I think is important to note about these templates when you're saving a project is that these dates are relative. So when you're creating a template and I say the template starts today and the first task is due 3 days after, and if 3 days after happens to be July 15th, when you create the new project from the template, that second task will not be due July 15th. It'll be due 3 days after the project is created, kind of like what we just saw, actually, just like we just saw with recurring tasks. So that's where when you see here, it doesn't say start date and due date, it says start offset days and due offset days. And that's because it's how many days from the offset date that we select when we create a project from a template should this be? And so just so we have context around that, when I go to create a project from a template, one of my templates that is, we'll say like, here's where I can choose my offset date. So if I want to start it today, if today is my offset date, which basically means no offset, that means that second task will be due 3 days from now. Versus if I want to have my offset date start in 2 weeks. So if I want to create the project today, but I want it to start in 2 weeks, well, now everything is going to push its offset dates relative to the 26th. So it'll be 3 days. That second task will be due 3 days after the 26th, which is like the 29th. So that's the key distinction. Now, when you're saying editing templates, there's no way to pull up a template and edit it. What you would do is create a new project from that template, make whatever changes you'd like to that, and then save a new version of that template. And then it's not going to impact any projects that were created originally from that template, but it will allow us to use a refined version. You might call it V2, you might delete the old one. These are decisions that are up to you, but it will help you make perfections on it in the meantime. I do not advocate saving a template midstream because it's going to register some tasks as completed. Things are just going to be a little wonky. If you have overdue tasks, they're going to save as negative integers, which is intentional. So another way we can use these templates are with negative integers. So if we set that offset date to be the end date of our project, this project needs to be done by December 30th. Well, that means the first task needs to be done 60 days before it. The next one needs to be done 50 days before it. So what I would do is set those as negative integers. And then when I select my offset date, instead of a start date, my offset date is a due date, right? All of this is covered, by the way, in our template article. So if this feels like a lot, just check out our template article. It talks about how you would end date and midpoint projects based on saving them as a template. But the idea here is that you can move all of these task dates relative to whenever you want to with that offset date. Okay. I'm just making sure I'm going through the questions here, so apologize for my silence. got a question around all tasks, tasks being unchecked or something. I would recommend opening up a ticket in support chat for that, just so we can determine if that's, so we can learn more about that. And I've got a question here about, it's pretty robust as far as how you manage your workflow with different people and whatnot. I would recommend you open up a ticket in our support chat, just so we can make sure I have an understanding of how that works. And I could give a suggestion, recommend it to you, rather than just kind of here on the podcast, or sorry, on the webinar here. Here, I think I'm doing a podcast, right? Okay. So, and we got a question for plans for a client portal. How do I maximize the use of this tool with my team without overwhelming my client? So good question. Nifty, there's a couple ways to work with clients. I'm going to go to my other website project just so we can check it out. So the first option is to bring them into Nifty as a guest. Guests are free, do not add to your subscription. And we can bring someone into a guest. When a guest joins a project, they do not see any other projects unless they've been invited to it. They do not see the name of the portfolio their project is in. They do not see the cross-project tools aside from, I believe, my work and overview. So if you have multiple projects with them, that'll scale, and they can see all the tasks assigned to them should you have multiple projects with them. They'll have fewer buttons on the interface, but they will see the different modules that you have in the project. So it's really interactive. They can participate with you in project discussions. You can assign them tasks. What you might do, as we looked at earlier, is we have those different statuses for we might add status for guest review, client review. And now any task that moves into this status will assign to the guest. I'm not sure Eugene is a guest, but Eugene is a guest. How about that? So any task that enters that status will be assigned to Eugene. Eugene gets a notification letting them know to take action on it. So working in Nifty as a guest is pretty lightweight, really, really a lot of value add. You can always hide things from guests. So for example, if I want to hide a specific task from a guest, I can do so. Say I want to hide this task from guests. Guests can't see it. If I want to hide an entire list, if I want to hide everything from my guests until it's assigned to them, I just say hide this list from guests. The list and all of the tasks in it will be hidden as well. So now guests are only seeing what's being put in front of them. If for whatever reason, this is not how you want to work with your guests, or if you feel like some people just aren't going to do this, which you'd be surprised, we have a ton of clients using Nifty successfully. There are some other options as well. Specifically, our task board and our roadmap can be shared as public read-only links. So I would say like client link, and I can generate a link to share with them. Now, just a note, if you try to open this link yourself, if I just copy paste and put it in the browser, it's just going to open up Nifty because I have access to the project and my browser knows that. So if you want to see what the client would see, you can copy this and open it in an incognito window or a browser where you're not logged into this Nifty workspace. And then you will see what the guest will see. But more specifically, what they will not see are the comments and conversations going on in the tasks. It's extremely high level. You get like the description, some of the metadata, and that's it. And then of course they can see the tasks being completed and where they are in their statuses. So there's a lot of value there as well. I've had someone refer to that as our project pizza timer, because you can keep track of where your project is without having to pick up the phone and ask anyone. So I love that analogy. So if you feel like your guest is more of the pizza timer variety, they just want to know where they're at without having to jump into the details of it, those share links are always available as well. So those are kind of, and those can be embedded to my knowledge. So if you have another system you use for whatever reason, you can embed that into those share links can be embedded as well there. So something else to keep in mind. So those are kind of the two key ways to bring your clients into Nifty, is bring them in or just report out. Mobile looks very different than desktop. Well, there's some things we can control about that and some we can't. So there's a lot of things we've tried to control. So for example, this sidebar is going to look really similar. And actually our new mobile apps, which I believe are out now, but if not, they'll be out in the next couple of days, will have all tasks, just to note. But this kind of flip between for our tasks and, or I'm sorry, chat and projects exists this way. A lot of our mobile design is actually kind of based around what our home looks like. So you'll see milestones will look more like this and tasks will look more like this. And then when you open them, they're a little bit different. It's on a phone, you know what I mean? There's going to be some inherent differences in that layout, but for the most part, we've tried to keep as many of the elements and feel to be the same as possible. And like I said, with this kind of scalable sidebar that we can use in both instances, it's pretty close compared to some other mobile apps. So something else to keep in mind there. We will be offering more pre-built templates, though we have some other great ideas coming online for creating templates. So that's something we should stay tuned about. I also recommend bringing people into or joining our Facebook page. If you've not, you can actually go right in here and say Facebook community. This is a great place. There's a lot of people helping each other out. This is what I try to do. This is the kind of work I conduct. Do you guys have any ideas? Do you have any templates? You can share, you can export templates. So that's a big one. If anyone's, interested in the layout that we used for today for this website creation, even if you don't build websites, just so you can see what these different lists and whatnot do, I'll take off all the dependencies and the confusing stuff. But I can share that as a link if you'd like, but these templates can be shared and exported. So this is made for our Facebook community, so we can share those links and use our same project data as well. There's a question around budget tracking. I'm going to say, if you could open up a support chat, I think it'd be easier to resolve that there to be able to discuss that in a little bit more value. Okay, so I think that the Facebook community will be found right here. If you go through the help button, Facebook, you'll see that right there. So I think that just about covers it for today. If you have, like I said, this will be posted on YouTube. So we can review all of that once it's on YouTube. If you have questions, support chat, join that Facebook community, ask some other people in Nifty. We have some really valuable members who know a lot about Nifty, challenging what I know. So I highly recommend joining there. And I want to thank you for joining here today. We're always here to help, so feel free to reach out. Have a good one, everyone.